So I've gotten the question a few times, where the heck's the ghost trick rumination? Because that's how that works, right? We stream a game, review a game, finish it, finalize it, and then we do a video kind of summarizing the stream. So where the heck's the video? Well, some of you probably remember that during the run I was sick. And then I got very sick, and then I got even more sick. In fact, some of you will probably remember that last Sunday we didn't even have our usual lore week or streaminations because I couldn't. I had literally lost my voice. Kind of hard to do that. I was actually thinking about, just for the hell of it, doing, like, sitting down and recording a startup thing, and I'd do an edit, and I'd be like, and just completely inaudible for a minute, and then be like, and then leave and come back, and then, just resume it whenever my voice came back. But anyways, Ghost Trick. I was rather fond of the Ace Attorney games. I think I made that very clear when we were going through them. But this feels like Ace Attorney done better in every way. I have a concept I call expansion effect. It's when it refers specifically to a moment in which people have made a work, and now they've got the tools, they've got the practice, they've got the know-how, they're familiar with the characters, they're familiar with each other, they're familiar with whatever hardware or software they're working with, and they're familiar with the actors, if there are actors involved, and the writing team. They know their stuff. They've gotten the practice, they're in the groove, they make the expansion. The expansion is pretty much just better in every way, and is a net improvement to the work. This is an extremely common thing in video gaming. We see this in Brood War to StarCraft, or we see this in Shivering Isles to Oblivion, or a dozen other examples I can name right off the top of my head. It's very common, right? So, this is expansion effect to Ace Attorney. I don't know how many of the team is the same team, but it's certainly enough to be noticeable, especially the music, which has the fingerprints of the Ace Attorney 1 composer all over it, which I believe is the same composer. Good stuff, right? Cool. Now, normally this is when I talk about gameplay, and I absolutely will, because the Ace Attorney games do have gameplay. I've heard some arguments to the contrary, and they're wrong, because there is actual gameplay functionality, what you do to interact with the device that you're interacting with, right? And there's other aspects of it too, but Ace Attorney still did have very threadbare gameplay. It was mostly about you trying to piece together things and how you interacted with the world around you. The save system was good, the rewind or the fast forward systems were pretty good, etc., etc. Like there were little gameplay mechanics that helped, but otherwise it was very threadbare. It was predominantly and primarily a talkie game. Even the actual detective bits of the game weren't really, let's be honest, all that complex, at least for the first 3 that I played. There were exceptions, of course. Every now and again, the game actually managed to pull something, and I was just like, oh, wow. This, however, actually has much more puzzle-related gameplay. I like this expression because, in many ways, this is how this would work, right? So, you're dead. Okay, cool. You're a ghost. Okay, cool. What can you do as a ghost? Well, not much. You have limited range. You can hop into or through specific things, but only certain things. And so what you automatically have is you effectively have a road mapped out in front of you of where you can go and why. It also logically means that, if someone hopped into this comb here, and I'm like, oh my god, and it starts trying to beat me to death and fails because it's a comb. But anyways, if someone did hop into the comb, well, I could take this with me, and this actually happens several times. It's something that becomes a regular gimmick throughout the game as more and more people become aware of the other side of things, the dead side of things, if you will. More people are capable of working with it. One of the things I really love, I know we're already drifting in narrative, but one of the things I really love in narrative is when the supernatural is introduced, and then through careful analysis and study and thought, the mundane is able to understand the supernatural and therefore work through and around it. This is the exact reason why the so-called masquerade exists. Not just within Vampire the Masquerade, but with the concept of the masquerade. Harry Potter touches on this as well. It's the idea that, okay, yeah, we have magic or we have superpowers or whatever, but if normal people knew how it worked, they would be able to work around it. It is, in fact, related to something I talk about a lot, which is called vampire ego syndrome. A vampire's like, oh, I'm super powerful, but all someone needs to do is know how your powers work and why, and they, with sufficient time, effort, and or care, can completely ruin your day, which is something that happens several times in this game. People start figuring out how the ghost rules work and how they piece them together, and they are able to do so in such a way as to be able to not only influence and manipulate the ghosts, but in some cases actually defeat ghosts, which I remind you have the ability to rewind time. So, That's pretty cool. I like that. I like the way that's presented. But the puzzles themselves are interesting, even gameplay-wise. There is one major flaw in the gameplay axis, and I did give it a negative for it. The way that the game functions is when you rewind, you can't rewind to a point, right? I mean, that's not true. You can rewind to a checkpoint. In some cases, you can make it unwinnable at the checkpoint. Let's not talk about that right now. But the point is, you've got the start of the 4 minutes, and you've got the checkpoint, and that's it, right? So you rewind back here, you need them to be at this point where you can interact with them. You just have to sit there and watch the cutscene again. And considering some of the interactions are very timing-based, so, you want to make sure that you're getting it right when that water drop is going down, or right when it's flipping up to the side or whatever, because it is timing-based, you kind of need to be precise in your timing. And if you screw up, guess which cutscene you're watching again. That sucks. But figuring out what you can interact with and how, the red herrings, it's possible to effectively build yourself into a corner. The game almost always tells you that, too. And so you know how to rewind. The fact that it's possible to fail without losing, if that makes any sense, is actually something I enjoy. I guess the Ace Attorney games did this as well. You could fail a case and have to start a case over. But in this case, it feels more video gamey. I know that sounds like such a stupid statement, but it's true. It feels like, it's like, okay, hang on. Start the stage over. I fell down a pit. Hang on. I got to go back through this time, and I'm going to try to jump over it next time, right? It's a basic concept. But what I love most is that I can't talk about the game anymore without spoiling the crap out of it. So, before we actually get into more, and I will remember, I got to talk about that, I have to mention that I recommend you play this game. I recommend it so much that I actually lent my copy to my sister so that she could play it, because I thought she would get into it. Here's the catch. This is a DS game, and it is console locked. If you've never heard me talk about that, it means it's never been ported or remastered or remade forward. So you gotta have a DS or the iOS specifically version in order to be able to play it. And that sucks. If you somehow have the availability to buy this game and play it, I absolutely recommend it. I would, of course, never recommend that someone were to be able to do something of a of a more illegal stint in order to try and play this game. But nevertheless, this is a very, very good game, and if you have any interest in it at all in a long-term perspective, I do recommend that you go ahead and procure a copy for yourself, via whatever means, and go ahead and watch and play and just enjoy it. That's probably enough of a warning. You're a ghost! There you go, there's your spoiler. So, no. The reason what we're talking about spoilers, even in the gameplay axis, is one of the things I said very early on, and you could check the VOD if you don't believe me, was the way the game was structured, it felt like, so they introduce rules to you. Now, all of these rules apply in universe, too. Something I refer to as rules magic, if-then statements, right? If you blink your right eye twice, then you explode the next thing you touch with your left hand, right? There's no real connective tissue there. There's no standard logic. There are rules logic. You have established a rule, and that's how rules logic works. Rules logic in terms of fiction usually applies to specific types of magic. Curses are very common. Your bloodline will always have this problem, kind of a thing. The catch with rules logic is you have to adhere to those rules. There's no real working around them. But once you understand those rules, you can work through them. This isn't a spoiler because it's in the first episode, but Xanatos raising the castle above the clouds is a perfect example of rules magic, if you're familiar with the Gargoyle series. So, all this stuff applies in gameplay as well as in story. And that makes sense. Because not only does that, it forms the puzzle, right? That's how puzzle games work, is you are given rules. You can move this thing this direction and this thing this direction, but you can't move it here. And once it's over here, it's locked, so you can't move it ever again, no matter even if you could move it otherwise. Those kind of rules are how puzzles function. So we have to have rules for the puzzle, but all of those rules still apply in the exact same manner in the narrative. So as I was going through the game, I was like, you know what? They're going to give us new abilities. I don't know if it's going to be power-ups, or maybe we'll, gain more souls or something, something to empower us to have different abilities. I was kind of right. What happens is we end up having other ghosts. Other ghosts have other rules. They can do different things than we can do. And it is very rules lawyer. It has to be the same shape as the other thing. And if it is, then you could swap them, for example. So that's kind of awesome, and it does very much extend and expand the kind of puzzles we have. Some of the later puzzles get very mean, but in a good way, in a way that I actually rather enjoyed. One of the things that was really catching me, too, was as we were going through the submarine level, it got to a certain point where I was like, we're hitting the reset button, aren't we? Fiction has this thing where it'll try to establish that a situation is bad. And it can cross over a line of bad. A line of where it's like, yeah, okay, there's no recovery from this point. You know it when you see it. You probably know what I'm talking about. A lot of movies and shows do this. Now, a badly written story, a terribly written story, will cross that line and then just magically make everything better. A not as badly, but still kind of badly written story will hit the reset button and just kind of rewind stuff. A very, very well-written story will hit the reset button in a way that makes perfect sense and is actually kind of awesome. Which leads me to this story. As we were going to the final area, and as they were discussing their options, I remember looking at the game, and I was just staring at the corpse of, what was his name? Not Sissel, the guy we think is Sissel the whole time. Yamil. I was staring at Yamil's corpse because we have the power to go to 4 minutes before a corpse's death. But that corpse was being locked in time for 10 years. So where is 4 minutes before its death? The answer is, of course, 10 years ago. And I'm looking at that And I know that's a weird way to start talking about the narrative of this game, but it's very, very clever. You know me. I love a good time travel story. I'm also really picky about it. I have dissected and ripped apart dozens, if not literally into the hundreds range of time travel stories by this point in my career, because most people don't bother. For a good reason, it's worth noting. There's a difference between Back to the Future, which doesn't bother because screw it, we're here to have fun, and Star Trek Voyager, which doesn't bother because work is hard. But most time travel stories don't bother. I find no flaws with the time travel of this particular game. So the way the time travel rules work, you go back and you take back the soul of the dead with you. That's important, remember that. So we take them back, we interact with the past in the same manner we could. There are limits to what we can do in the past. We can change stuff, of course, but there's only so much we can change. Once we have changed things sufficiently, we go ahead and save them, and then we return to the present. The present is now altered. The person whose life has saved, the other timeline's memories kind of get folded into them. Not 100%, they don't remember everything, but they remember the fact that they died, some of the events that happened, and their interactions with us, specifically. We return immune to time, because we're a frickin' ghost. Once we return, we now are able to then reinteract with them and be like, hey, we saved your life, cool. This is how several of the living people are able to do the whole understand the rules thing I mentioned earlier, right? Funny little anecdote, by the way. We encounter Lynn, and she's kind of an airhead, and she's kind of funny, and she's a cool character. She's a great, great banter with us, Sissel. But what's really interesting is we encounter her, and she doesn't really put stuff together. And we encounter a few other people, and we help them out. And then we encounter Jowd. Jowd starts piecing things together immediately, just based on observation and deduction. And Cabanela does the exact same thing. Both people are able to just kind of, oh, this works this way and this works this way. Through observation and analysis, figure out how the system works and also assist us in the matter. There are some other exceptions to that too, but it's interesting because it also serves as a gameplay function as well to help us get through some otherwise, fairly difficult levels like that fricking prison escape because holy crap. Anyways, getting off topic. So, those time travel rules are established very early and very clearly. This is how we can have interactions and friendships and relationships with the living characters despite being dead and having no practical way to interact with them. Because all we have to do is reconnect with them, emphasis on reconnect, and then we can go ahead and talk with them and be a part of them. It's worth noting that we can only really reconnect with people who have already died or who have already interacted with the dead. Another caveat that comes up later with the minister. Now, one of the things that I bang on about is continuity, because continuity is awesome and is the best thing ever. When it's good. But there's two different really big categories of continuity. One is external continuity, one is internal. External doesn't apply here, so I'm not even going to cover it. Internal continuity is essentially how good of notes were the writers keeping when they were writing their own story. If a writer introduces a person over here who's owns this shop and this shop sells this item, Then a few chapters along the road, we get to this thing where they're needing this item, and they go to this shop and they encounter this person. That's because the writer actually paid attention enough to actually remember that, right? Or maybe they planned it out in advance. Both are possible. But either way, that kind of note-keeping is necessary for good internal continuity. This game connects in on itself so much, it's kind of crazy. There are numerous examples, tons of examples of where you see someone and she's just kind of not a great mother, and she's got a sick daughter, and that's whatever. And then several chapters later, by the way, the reason that she's here with her daughter instead of at home is because she left because she was pissed off at her minister. Oh, hang on. There's another layer to that, because the whole reason she's pissed off at him is because he's ordering an execution tonight, because he's being blackmailed into it and also mind controlled into it as well, which is directly tied to both villainous groups of this game. All of that from some old woman who doesn't like it when the dog barks. And that's what I mean by internal continuity. It's absolutely all over the place, and I love it. The game's also pretty funny. As per the Ace Attorney standard, they don't try to make these people realistic. Instead, they just try to make them believable, which works very well for me. And this is as good a time as any to mention the animations. Everybody mentions the animations, because everyone loves the animations, but that's because they're really good. This is a DS game, I remind you. And so what they did is they looked at and said, And so they used fairly low poly count 3D models, but they have, I don't remember the terminology, forgive me, multiple animation hooks in the skeleton. So they can be very animated. They can do all kinds of movement with the skeleton that they have designed, specifically because of the fact that they wanted to ensure that each character was very expressive. And almost every character does have, for lack of a better way to put it, visual storytelling in their body language and how they move and how they operate. We see some people just kind of slouch. We see some people who are very straight and proud. We see some people who are just kind of bouncy. We see some people who are way extravagant, etc. We see fairly large number of these. In fact, probably my favorite bit of body language, after an entire game of establishing all these quirky, cartoony, zany characters with all this very expressive, emotional thing, is when we meet Yamil for the first time. He's barely moving. Because he's dead. He can't feel anything. He can't operate. He's kind of half dead and half living. He's just sitting there like, yeah. And he's just a stone wall. Probably, I mean, obviously they do a really overt thing when he slams his hand down on a burning hot piece of metal and is utterly unfazed by it. But the point remaining, even overall, his body movement is very not, which is wonderful and actually applies beautifully for that story thing. I guess I should just discuss the story here. I don't know what to say about it. It connects to itself wonderfully. There's time travel that works really, really well and is extremely well written. The characters are awesome. The tone is awesome. There's tons of what I call Babylon 5 effect in this one. That's where the first time through you see A and think A, but the second time through you realize B and think B. That's important because it's related to foreshadowing, and there's lots of foreshadowing in this. I mean, how many times did I keep pointing out the cat fixation the game had? But Babylon 5 effect is specifically, and it's much harder to write, is specifically a form of foreshadowing where it has to mean something different both times. You have to think it's A the first time, and you have to realize it's B the second time. And that's harder to write than it sounds. It's the idea of trying to write a single line that can be applied different ways based on perspective is what that boils down to. There's a lot of that in this game. Completely changing the perspective on most of the earlier stuff. Where's our sequel to this game? The game's crying out for a sequel. We know that Sissel is still alive and still functional and still has the ghost power. He still has the cat, still has the meteorite chunk, still has all those extraterrestrial powers. By the way, funny thing, I like explanations. I do. I'm one of those weirdos who likes it when my fiction is explained. But if you don't want to explain it, one thing I tend to respect is when you say, it was a rock from space, and then just move on from that, which is exactly what they do. There's some meteorite that landed. Okay, that's it. We're done. We're good. That's it. That's the whole extent of it. But, we still have those powers. We know powers change over time. We know Yamil gets out. We know several of the people still remember us because they were part of the final ghost trick, the final go back. And remember, see, I'm doing it myself too. Remember, the people who go back with you have memories and acknowledgement of what happened. So Yamil still remembers us. And there's a couple other people as well who might have some acknowledgement and memory of us, including, of course, Lynn. And so there's connections there. We still have the villains. They're still off doing their own thing. No, not Beauty. She's turbo dead, along with, I don't remember his name. They didn't actually say his name in the game. I looked it up, but I don't remember right now. But no, we still have, I'm an evil, blue-skinned, evil person who's evil. Actually, he was a relatively effective villain. He did do exactly what I said. He looked at the rules of the ghost trick, figured out how it worked, and said, okay, I'm going to do this. And I'm going to try. The plate he had in mind for us and for Yamil is really horrific. You're trapped at the bottom of the ocean with no connections, no ability to get out. Because remember, as part of the puzzle gameplay, you can only reach so far. And in lore, you can only reach so far. So you're trapped. Have fun. You might get out in a few centuries. Maybe. If just pure random luck happens to send you a bone. Hell, even us getting that thing was insane. We had to ride a freaking missile in order to get there. Good lord. Anyways, very clever stuff. But he's still out there doing whatever. And he mentions another deal, which he's about. I don't know. I feel like there's a lot they could do with this. And I don't want to go too far because that's kind of blank sheet of paper syndrome. I love the idea of going through as what is effectively a good Lich King. This is mentioned during the run. And it's an idea I've bounced around several times as well. You have mastery over death, but your job is to help. You are good inclined. You're trying to make this situation better. Oh gosh, you poor thing. I'm so sorry. Maybe you shouldn't have died. If you shouldn't have died, well, let's see if we can fix that. And of course, that gets into tricky dispositions, like what does the word shouldn't mean? But the fact remains that you were assassinated by some dude with a shotgun who was sent to kill you by evil people. I think we can stop that one. I think we can interfere there. And so forth and so on. Excuse me. Still a little sick. One of my only complaints about the whole game is periodically there's a bit of an empty text problem. I'm just sitting here thinking, God, Lore, how could you complain about empty text? That's all you say in your entire life. I would like to think I'm a lot better at not doing empty text in modern times. I don't know. You look at my old ruminations, I do empty text all the time. Empty text is when there's words happening, but nothing new is being conveyed. And there's a lot of just repetition, a lot of people just kind of being like, hey, what's going on? Nothing is actually happening in dialogue at several lengthy sections of this game, which does drag it down a little bit, but only a little. I don't know what else to say. I just want to gush more. I love Jowd. I love Camila. I love the Justice Minister. Yamil is one of the more interesting villains. So I've seen some people debate whether Yamil deserves his, redemption, I guess is the word I want to use there. Now, by the end of the game, he absolutely has earned it. He does a lot to work with the different types of ghost tricks to enable them himself to save the girl and at the cost of himself. And he goes to jail for 10 years for what he did and serves his time and then gets out and everything's cool. So that I'm with that. That works. That lines up. But he does go very quickly from, I'm just going to kill you because I'm insane to, oh my gosh, I don't know what was wrong with me. Pretty quickly. I have a theory about that, which I wanted to share with you. If you pay attention, Yamil is just until he loses his body. Now, we could argue this, but the point is, he is out of contact with his body for an extended period of time, for one of the only times that we see him do this. He, leaves the body behind to go do the things, and then he ends up helping us, and then we start chatting, and yada, yada, yada. It's also worth noting that the evil blue-skin people, Dottum-dee, Dottum-die, managed to steal the asteroid chunk from his body very cleanly somehow, and just abscond with it. I have a weird theory that the continued connection to either his body, the radiation, the temporal ghost radiation, or both, was serving as a constant, let's call it a headache. I know that's a weird analogy, but you're probably thinking, a headache's not a big deal, Lore. Have you ever felt a really bad headache? How about a headache that won't go away for hours? What does that do to your mood? What does it do to your mentality? Now imagine a headache that lasts for 10 years. I think the idea here is that he was never exactly a great person, and he did do wrong things. But he was just getting worse and worse about it because of how much this whole thing distended him. His fiancée killing herself probably didn't help anything. So it's not like it is an unearned redemption. It's just, this is my theory to help smooth over the edges a little bit. Because in terms of scenes, he goes from, pointing a machine gun at a woman to helping her to safety. And those are the two scenes we see in sequence with him. So that's kind of its own thing. I do have to say, though, I love the section where we have to save Caminella from Yamil. I absolutely adore that section. Because the whole idea there is, we can't just manipulate stuff directly. He's a ghost. He knows what that looks like. The moment we do that, he knows something is up. Now, he doesn't know about the temporal alterations, so we could try that as many times as we want. He doesn't know that we're, just making multiple attempts. But he does know if we're there in that moment, in that particular time, and so blah, blah, blah. It's just really, really cool and really well written, and that's the whole game as a whole. The final thing I want to comment on is, obviously, this game is amusing because the two saviors and heroes of the game are a cat and a dog. But the way that's presented is weirdly heartwarming, isn't it? And yet at the same time, it's also kind of unnecessary. Hear me out for a second. So let's talk about the heartwarming thing. The cat and the dog saving the people, becoming attached to them, trying very hard in order to save their humans. That's admirable. I've literally known dogs personally who absolutely would do this if it was within their capacity. I'm not sure about cats, but I do know dogs would. I could name one cat that would do this. And I bring that up, though, because that's heartwarming and awesome in its own way. The fact that Missile is our MVP, the fact that we are a cat, all of that stuff lines up, with one exception. There's one caveat to this whole game, and I do feel it was a detractory. I didn't give it a negative in the story axis. It removed a positive. Because at the end of the game, we find out that this is the second loop through. That what ended up happening is Missile went through the loop already and failed because we were a dick, and then learned what he could and then did all this stuff and warped back to 10 years ago, and then just kind of stuck around for 10 years waiting for us to get to this point where we could then do it again and Missile could try again. I don't think that adds anything to the story, personally. In fact, if anything, I think it detracts from it. I think it's just an unnecessary final twist for twist's sake, in a story that otherwise has wonderful reveals, great twists, and is otherwise extremely well constructed. I just wanted to comment on that because I'm curious how many people massively disagree with me on that. As always, looking forward to your comments and thoughts for the three of you who have made it this far, because everyone else is off playing it, hopefully. And hopefully I'll be able to get caught up on some of the paperwork because I lost like 3 days of my life to being sick, and that totally sucks. I'll see you next time.